We're all human. And it's important to know that doctors are people too. Doctors have emotions, they have passions in life and hobbies, and they enjoy participating as active members in the communities where they practice medicine. Doctors have families, friends, and relationships. While the latest in healthcare and the most current treatments for ailments will be topics on this Doctors Are People Too radio TV show, the focus will be in learning more about the interesting aspects in a physician's life and what they do away from the doctor's office or operating room table.
Hello, South Florida and beyond, and globally on the iHeartRadio app. Welcome to Doctors Are People Too. I'm really excited tonight because we have the multiple sclerosis expert for Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties on the program tonight, Dr. Brian Steingo. Dr. Steingo, how are you doing tonight?
Good, thanks, David. How are you?
Great, and thanks for coming aboard Doctors Are People Too. I want to get right into it. I've never had a multiple sclerosis expert on the program, and I think it's something we hear a lot in the news as common men and women, going through the daily grind with work, combining with stress, maybe family life, and we don't really think about multiple sclerosis unless it affects a family member or maybe even someone we're close to, in our daily, TV watching or music, music superstars we may follow, sports figures. So I want to ask you first a very basic question, it sounds like, but I think it's very a little complex than that. What is multiple sclerosis?
Firstly, let me say in terms of what you just said about people not knowing about MS, the incidence of MS in the general population is approximately 0.1%. In other words, the risk of getting MS is about 1 in 1,000. That's why you might not hear very much about it unless you have family members or friends that have multiple sclerosis. And so this is a disease that affects approximately 400,000 people in the United States. That's the kind of number that's given out. It may be higher than that now. And worldwide, about 2.5 million people are affected by this disease. And so multiple sclerosis is considered to be an autoimmune disease. And an autoimmune disease is something in which the immune system actually is the system in our bodies that is not working properly. And in autoimmune diseases, the immune system attacks other organs. So, for example, in multiple sclerosis, the immune attack is directed against what we call the central nervous system. That is the brain, the spinal cord, and the optic nerves. So, if the immune system attacks the brain, spinal cord, and optic nerves and gives rise to all the symptoms of MS. And typically, this is a disease that affects people in a younger age, say between the age of 20 to 45 or 50. And it is more common in women than men, approximately of a ratio of about 3 to 1.
Wow. I did not know that, Dr. Steingo. So obviously, 3 to 1, that's a pretty high ratio. Is there a reason why, through research and study, physicians have found out why it's more common in women than men?
No, we don't know that. But over the years, actually, multiple sclerosis, we do see more people with that. In part, it's because we have better diagnostic techniques, but it does seem that even taking that into consideration, that there is more multiple sclerosis and that it has increased, especially in women more so than in men. And this also applies to other autoimmune diseases. For example, lupus or other autoimmune diseases also more common in females than males.
And I would have thought, as, I'm just watching what's going on in the mainstream here, Montel Williams with multiple sclerosis, Richard Pryor from back in the day. I think there's been a lot said about that. And then we talked a few years ago about Jack Osborne, the Osborne family, and right. His battle with multiple sclerosis. But I would have thought, with that's 3 men, that this would be more of something that affected men. But yeah, 3 to 1, it affects women to men. Wow. Let me ask you, are these numbers rising with multiple sclerosis? Because you said it's 0.1% of the population, 1 in 1,000 or 400,000 people in the U.S. annually, 2.5 million worldwide. Are these numbers on the rise at all?
There has been some increase, we believe, in the numbers. As I said, part of it is because we are much better able to diagnose MS. But there has been some increase in the numbers. And just to go back to your earlier point, you mentioned a lot of the male personalities involved. There's female personalities, Annette Funicello, of course, Terry Garr, so other people of that people, females, women with multiple sclerosis as well. Multiple sclerosis is much more common in Caucasians than people of African American origin, but often is more severe in people of African origin, especially in males.
Fascinating the way that this disease presents itself. Now, also going back to that, 20 to 45 years old, and then the 50-year-old age range is where you're seeing the most of this. Is there a reason that it affects young adults and middle-aged individuals more so than an older population that like we'd see with maybe like Parkinson's disease or some of those more neurological disorders that we see in the mainstream?
I mean, the answer is there is a reason. I'm sure there is, but we don't know it. We don't know why that happens. The disease has been seen from infancy to older ages. So although 20 to 50 is the classical age range, we see the disease in infants. It's been described in young kids. It's been described in older people for the first time. As their first known occurrence of the disease. So it can occur in a wide age range, but it's mostly from 20 to 50. And why that happens, we don't know. In part, you did mention Parkinson's disease, which is a largely degenerative disease. Typically, when MS starts out in the early years, it's what we call a relapsing disease. So people tend to have episodes or attacks, as we call them, or exacerbations. We use all of those words. And then they often will get better for a while and then may have another attack or another relapse or exacerbation. And that condition early on, when there's relapses, is predominantly an inflammatory condition. If we were to examine what happens, we would find that there's inflammation in the nervous system. Later, as the disease progresses, it might change and become more of a progressive disease. Excuse me. And a progressive disease is more of a degenerative disease. So the diseases like Parkinson's are more degenerative diseases. So MS early on is mostly inflammatory, although we do believe right from the very beginning there may be some degenerative component, but it's predominantly inflammatory early on and then later becomes more degenerative.
Now, what are the common symptoms of MS? Is there anything we should be looking out for, or maybe we notice something different from a family member where it can be a red flag and we can bring them to their primary care doctor or even referral to a neurologist like yourself? What are the common symptoms?
So the thing about MS is, as the name implies, it's multiple sclerosis. The word sclerosis refers to scarring, and the scars can be widespread in the brain, the spinal cord, or the optic nerve. So therefore, there are extensive possible symptoms of MS. For example, we can start from the top of the head and go down to the tip of the toes and start out with eye symptoms. So optic neuritis is a common early symptom of MS. But there are other eye symptoms such as double vision. There can be alterations in speech or swallowing, memory loss, cognitive impairment, numbness, weakness, tingling, loss of balance, bowel and bladder problems. And so I've just mentioned a few of the common symptoms to you. Any of those could occur. Because the symptoms are so diffuse, often MS can be mistaken for other diseases, and there are many mimics for MS. So it's very important when we diagnose MS, one of our conditions is we must be sure that there's nothing else that's explaining the patient's symptoms. That is an important part of our diagnostic criteria, because we have no absolute test to diagnose MS. We can't take a blood test and diagnose MS. And so to diagnose MS, what we do is we look at the clinical picture, which means what has our patient told us, what is their history, is it a history that suggests MS? Then we do a thorough examination, neurological examination, and then the most important advance really in diagnosing MS in the last 30 years has been the advent of MRI scans. So MRI scans were a huge advance in diagnosing MS. Before we had MRI scans, other scans like CAT scans, not really of benefit in MS. So the first MRI scan in someone with MS was done in 1981, and MRI scans are now a huge help to us in not only diagnosing MS, but following MS, how is someone doing, and as an important asset in clinical trials to evaluate results of effective medications in clinical trials.
That's fascinating. I think MRI is something that we mention, on a very, regular basis. So I was fascinated by you saying that the first one for MS was done only in 1981. That is really something. I want to go on a couple points here, but first for the listeners, we are here with Dr. Brian Steingo. He's a neurologist. He's director of the Multiple Sclerosis Center at Sunrise Medical Group. That's at 572. Actually, I have your Pompano Beach address right here, but that's on Pine Island Road in Sunrise there, North Pine Island Road. And the number is 954-738-1700 or sunrisepractices.com. I know you used to have an office in Pompano Beach as well. But Dr. Steingo treats patients from Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties. And Dr. Steingo, you said as far as north as Port St. Lucie. Is that correct?
I mean, some people will travel, to see a specialist, yes.
Okay, so from Port St. Lucie, all the way down to Miami, but mostly in this, the Palm Beach County where we are tonight, and into Broward County. Now, you talked a little bit about the eye, and I want to just go off on this tangent for a second. Is you have a great group of neurologists with you at your practice, Sunrise Medical Group, including a neuro-ophthalmologist. Can you talk a little bit about the team you have there in Sunrise?
So, I mean, MS is a disease we've spoken before about how it can affect many parts of the nervous system. So, for example, MS commonly affects the eyes. It can cause optic neuritis as a common eye symptom, which causes a loss of vision in one eye. It can cause double vision. It can cause an abnormal eye movement where the eyes jump from side to side. So eye involvement is common in MS. So one of our colleagues in the practice is trained in neuro-ophthalmology. He's a neurologist, but he's done a fellowship in neuro-ophthalmology. So it's useful for me. He has the tools available to study our patients. We also have a neurosurgeon in our practice. It's not something I personally frequently need, but people with MS can get neck and back problems. And then we have several other neurologists who back me up when I'm not there. We also have in our practice, most importantly, MRI scan available. So if I do an MRI scan on someone, I can view the results on my computer, in fact, before they've even left the MRI suite. They can be walking back to my office and I can be looking at their MRI scan. And then we have physical therapy too. We have very well-trained physical therapists to get patients onto an exercise program. Exercise very important for MS.
And that's Sunrise Medical Group, the website right there on the screen. And for listeners is sunrisepractices.com. Dr. Steingo, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break. And on the other side, we're going to talk about how is multiple sclerosis treated on Doctors Are People Too.
My dad is a cardiologist, and so I have two brothers, and we were all equally painful to my mom. And so to get us out of the hospital, we would go on rounds with him on Saturdays and Sundays in the hospital back in Oklahoma City. And we used to, race wheelchairs down the hallways from the time I was about 6 years old. When I was a freshman in high school, I got to watch my first heart transplant. But I think what really kind of made me want to be a doctor was around the holidays. The house always filled up with tons of gifts from thankful patients, and to impact people's lives like that in a positive manner was something that was very exciting to me. I'm very patient-oriented. I care about the patients both professionally and personally, and not only about their result, but also that I'm passionate about new technologies. I'm passionate about research, and I'm passionate about offering them the best technology available with the lowest risk and with the best outcome. What you want in a physician is someone who is personable, works as a team, embraces new technology, is clearly accomplished, but I think most importantly is somebody who you get confidence in. And the way I would have confidence is if I had a condition, I would read as much about it as I could before I showed up, probably off the internet, and then ask very directed questions. I do a lot of exercise. Running is what I use to kind of calm my brain down and kind of sort my thoughts out. So I enjoy, I just will put my shoes on and go for a run, and then I do mix in a little bit of yoga, something probably not many people know about me. I keep that on the down low, but so I do some yoga, and I go to the gym like most people.
You are listening to Doctors Are People Too with David DaPino, who shows us the human side of medical doctors in the community. If you have a question for our guest, call into the show at 888-565-1470. Now, let's get back to the fun side of doctors and show that they are people too.
And we're back on Doctors Are People Too, South Florida and beyond, and on the iHeartRadio app. We're here with Dr. Brian Steingo. And Dr. Steingo is in Sunrise, Florida. He's at 3540 North Pine Island Road in Sunrise. The number there is 954-321-1010. 1776. Dr. Steingo's a neurologist specializing in multiple sclerosis, and as we said before, treats patients in all 3 South Florida counties of Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade, but mostly in the Broward area, Dr. Steingo, and obviously here in Boca Raton, you have patients from here as well. I know you told us before about the symptoms of MS, and we briefly touched on this and that and how it's diagnosed. But how is MS treated? So once you have a case, what are the treatment options for a patient and something you can maybe help their family with as well?
So there's different aspects to treatment. So we spoke before, I spoke to you about how patients often start out with their first episode being what we call a relapse or an exacerbation or attack. And we have medications that we use to treat their first episode, their attack. And then from that, we have to decide if we're going to treat their disease. MS actually was described by a French neurologist called Charcot about 150 years ago almost. And if you think about that, we only had our first FDA-approved drug for MS in 1993. So for many, many years, 135 years or whatever it was, we had no drugs for MS. And 125 years. Now we have medications approved. The first one was approved in 1993, and now currently we have 15 different approved agents for MS. So there's been huge advances in the treatment. The first drugs described in the 1990s were injectable medications. Since that time, we also have 3 oral medications and 2 medications given by infusion, meaning given into the vein in an infusion center. And that adds up to our 15 choices, and we're expecting some more drugs to come along soon. All those drugs that I've mentioned are drugs that are approved for treating relapsing forms of MS. For treating the progressive forms of MS, in the past we've had pretty much nothing. There's been one chemotherapy drug that's approved. It's very toxic. Most people don't use it. But now, for the first time, we do have some interesting drugs coming along, potentially for progressive MS. There is one that we anticipate the FDA will approve at the end of this year. There are some active clinical trials, some positive clinical trial results recently on some other drugs. So finally, now we're starting to see the light toward treatment of progressive forms of MS as well.
Go ahead, Dr.
I was simply going to say that. So that's the second aspect of treatment, which is the disease-modifying drugs. There's another aspect of treatment, which is treat the symptoms. So we treat the disease and we must treat the symptoms, which are extensive. So whatever the symptoms are, whatever they might be, pain, tingling, burning, bowel and bladder problems, whatever symptoms are, there are many, fatigue, etc., many symptoms, we have medications to treat symptoms. And then finally, the most important aspect of treatment is the patients themselves. And they must be part of the treatment plan. It's very important that people are part of the plan. I'm always saying that MS is a team disease. It doesn't just involve me. I'm the quarterback. And hopefully I won't throw interceptions or get sacked and fumble like somebody did yesterday. And hopefully we will work together as a group, my patients and myself, and get the best total program for them.
You wouldn't be talking about Ryan Tannehill, Dr. Steingo.
I won't say any names.
He almost fumbled it away yesterday.
Yes.
Are you a big Dolphins fan? I think you told me before you watch it with your grandson.
Well, I do now. I mean, I used to have season tickets for many years.
Nice.
And when they went 1-15 at that point, I no longer could afford to spend that money. And so now we watch with my grandsons, yes.
That was a tough year with Cam Cameron as head coach. I actually, Dr. Steingo, if we go off tangent really quickly, my parents had season tickets 1990 through 92 with the Marx brothers, Mark Clayton and Mark Duper, at the end of their career. Yeah. And we were sitting second row in the end zone, and Marino would fire it right over the middle. Yeah. And one time, Clayton caught it right over the middle, and he flipped it right up to me in the second row. I still remember it to this day. And saw a few games at the Orange Bowl back in the day.
Yeah. I saw the game in 1985 in the Orange Bowl when they beat Chicago.
Oh, wow.
It was the only game Chicago lost that year, but I saw that game.
Monday Night Football? I think
it was Monday Night Football, yes. I was down there. We went down. The parking was horrible. Remember, around the whole Orange Bowl.
Yeah.
But at least in those days, every single game you knew they had a chance to win.
Yeah,
and I wish they could get that together again.
They were very competitive back in the day, and the Shula days. I mean, we should give him credit, Don Shula.
Yeah,
I know he's had some health issues lately, but kudos to Don Shula. He gave us some great memories, and keep it up, Coach. And that was a great trip down memory lane there. You never know until you talk to a doctor what they're into, but that's great that you spend time today with your grandson. You guys have a connection, and although it's tough to watch, I mean, that was a great game yesterday.
Yes. Well, they won. At the end of the game, they won.
Yeah.
They nearly made us sick by the end of the game, but they won.
You know, that game had everything. The missed field goal, when you think like, oh, for sure Cleveland's going to nail this field goal, and the reason he missed, I don't know if you saw the replay, but the holder tilted the ball a little bit, and if you do that, you can really mess up the kicker, and he just shanked it left, and it was something that's
Jim Carrey movie, Pet Detective.
Oh yeah, Ace Ventura. Yeah. You got it.
Ace Ventura, right? That's right.
You know, I was lucky a couple weeks ago. FAU played at Miami, and it was the first time that Dolphin Stadium was completed. It's not complete. I'm sorry, it's phase 2.
Okay.
But it was interesting because everyone was talking how 92% of the stadium is covered, and you won't get direct sunlight, which was true for a 6 o'clock game.
Mm-hmm.
But then everyone was like, well, yeah, if it rains too, you won't get wet. And then we got one of those South Florida torrential rain, and I was sitting in the 4th row, and I was soaked, and there was nowhere to go because everyone was going up, and you could only go on the field or right up the stairs. And I couldn't get up the stairs, and I was soaked. So Dolphin Stadium is not completed yet, but it really looks a lot different. It's really nice. I think they sunk $500 million in there. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Sounds good.
Well, yeah, let's bring this right back into MS. You said something before that was very interesting. I jotted it down with all my notes, was the word mimics. And I wanted to ask you, is MS often confused with other disease because it has mimicking factors?
Well, firstly, the symptoms of MS are so widespread, and other conditions can have symptoms that can overlap with MS. So people will have a bunch of different symptoms, and they will go to the internet and plug in their symptoms, and it'll come up with MS as one of the diagnoses because the symptoms of MS are so widespread. Secondly, as we said before, the characteristic of MS is the abnormal MRI scan with specific white spots on the scan. And where they're located is very important to diagnose MS. But often radiologists will look at a scan with white spots, and they'll say this could be this or this or this, and one of their differentials will be MS when it's not realistic based on that scan. But there are many conditions that cause white spots. For example, just with normal aging, people can get white spots in their brain. So white spots may occur in the brain in 50% of people over the age of 50 just with normal aging. But they don't look the same as the white spots of MS. White spots can occur in common conditions like migraine, Lyme disease, lupus, other autoimmune diseases called Sjogren's disease, sarcoidosis. So there are a variety of different diseases that can cause some white spots and can be differentiated. The characteristics of the white spots in MS are different. So
that's very important. So obviously, if you are a family member, have MS, it's very important to get, obviously, as your primary care, referred to a neurologist, but to the correct expert or someone who does a lot of MRIs like Sunrise Medical Group, so they can distinguish, the difference of the white spots on the scan. Correct, Dr. Steingo?
Right. So, in fact, it's not always just black and white that it's either yes or no. It can be difficult sometimes, and so the diagnosis of MS, you might not be able to make it immediately. Sometimes it requires a little bit of time to observe someone, maybe repeating scans, observing them for a while. An additional test we sometimes do is a lumbar puncture to look at the spinal fluid, and that may give us some additional information. So there are other ways to help us, but sometimes the thing that may help us over time is time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes following someone over a period of time will help us make the correct diagnosis.
Now, these tests, you're very office-based neurologist, correct, at the time? Are these tests available in the office during an office visit? Something that obviously maybe the lumbar puncture may not be, but the other tests? Right.
So firstly, to diagnose MS, you need a good history, which is the office visit. You need a good physical examination, neurological examination. You do that at the visit. You get an MRI scan. You might refer someone. So if someone has the appropriate insurance, we can do it in our office. And like I said, I can look at the scan within 2 minutes of them having it done, which will be important information. Or based on their insurance, they might be forced to go somewhere else. And then I stress them to bring the disc back to me. Because sometimes people will arrive back with a report, and I'm saying, if I have to make the important diagnosis of MS, I want to look at the scan with my own eyes. So always make sure to bring the disc back. And so I stress to everyone, when you leave the MRI scan center, make sure that they put the disc in your hand so you can take it to your neurologist to see it. Those are all office-based things that we do. And then we can do a spinal tap. There are some older tests called evoked potentials. And that is where you stimulate some part of the brain, for example, with flashing lights in front of the eyes or a sound in the ears, and it records the brain response, and we can see how brain pathways are working. I do those very infrequently.
Mm-hmm. And we're here with Dr. Brian Steingo, a neurologist specializing in multiple sclerosis and director of the Multiple Sclerosis Center at Sunrise Medical Group in Sunrise, Florida. But he does treat patients from Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties. I know for a fact he's got a lot of patients from Palm Beach County. And we were broadcasting into that area as well, that he's in Broward. So that's 3540 North Pine Island Road. That's in Sunrise, actually where the Florida Panthers play in Sunrise. So they had a big year last year with the hockey team, but it's a really nice area out there. It's not as packed as the traffic we have over here on the east side. But the number is 954-321-1776. Dr. Steingo was telling us before. There's a neurosurgeon on site there. He's got a team of neurologists. I'm probably going to butcher this, but I'm going to try. He's got a neuro-ophthalmologist. So on site, that's part of his team. Wow, I was surprised I was able to nail that. I always called it a neuro-ophthalmologist, but when I heard you say it, neuro-ophthalmologist, it makes sense with the way it's spelled. David, you should be better on your phonetics there.
You got it right.
But thank you, because I learned something tonight. I know I've learned a lot tonight, Dr. Steingo. So we're going to take another break, and on the other side, I'm going to talk to Dr. Steingo a little bit about some clinical research studies that he's already finished, and a couple that, may be an opportunity for a friend, family member, or a patient with MS to get involved in on Doctors Are People Too.
I make a dinner for me and my girlfriend. We ate, we enjoyed. The dinner was very good. She was ready to go to sleep. I said, okay, I'm going to stay on the couch a little bit to watch TV. I started to feel something in my throat, like I was choking. And all of a sudden, I feel the pain, the sharp pain, like somebody put a knife in your back and open and do like this. That was when I called my girlfriend. I said, you have to take me to the hospital. I couldn't die. When they were doing the test, they saw something was weird. My valve was ripped. I said, God, please help me to get out of this. Dr. Valle was on call. He was who performed my surgery. I described like an angel. I described like he was there to do that for me. My girlfriend, my son, he told me when they saw him getting out from the operation room, he was sweating. He was tired to be there for 10 hours. For me, it's unbelievable. I can walk, I can exercise a little bit, and I can drink red one, that light red one. Of course, 1 glass or 2 glasses. I see the life different. And I want to see my granddaughter to grow and my son to get old. So I wanna live. I think that God gave me one more chance in life, and I had to take advantage of this.
You are listening to Doctors Are People Too with David DaPino, who shows us the human side of medical doctors in the community. If you have a question for our guest, call into the show at 888-565-1470. Now, let's get back to the fun side of doctors and show that they are people too.
And we're back on Doctors Are People Too, here live in Boca Raton and on the iHeartRadio app. And I have to laugh because Dr. Steingo and I have been going back and forth on the Dolphins for the last few minutes during the commercial break. Dr. Steingo, we need our own Dolphins show just so we can, kind of analyze the ins and outs of the fish here. You were just saying, wow, with the way that Tannehill was turning the ball over was really something yesterday. But we'll get more into that in a bit. I want to talk to you about a little bit about clinical research. So I know in neurology, clinical research is a big part because obviously you told me earlier that 25 years ago you were a general neurologist, but then the advent and the invention of several drugs that were FDA approved open up the door to some great multiple sclerosis care. So what clinical research studies are you currently involved with right now?
So let me say that when I finished my residency and started neurology, a lot of neurologists had very little interest in treating MS because there were no drugs to treat MS. And you were faced with treating a potentially devastating lifelong disease where you couldn't offer very much. It was quite bleak. So I saw general neurology, but I saw MS patients as part of that. And then later in the early 90s, I became specifically interested and have had a great interest in MS since that time. And so in the 1980s and 90s and onwards, there's been a great number, an explosion almost in MS clinical trials. And according to the National MS Society, since 2000, and you go and look at the site, clinicaltrials.gov. So for anybody who wants to know where to look for trials for MS drugs, all FDA-approved trials are on, to look at is clinicaltrials.gov. And if you look at that, since the year 2000, there are 900 trials for MS and 300 ongoing or planned trials for MS as of January of 2016. So a huge explosion in trials. And so in our practice, we have done clinical trials for MS for about the past 20 years, including trials on some of the approved drugs. So we did a trial on a drug called Tysabri or natalizumab. Tysabri is the brand name. That drug was subsequently approved. We did a trial for a drug called fingolimod, which is now called Gilenya. We did the trials for these drugs before they were subsequently approved. So it's very exciting to be involved in the clinical trials, and then the drugs are subsequently approved. So we've done multiple trials in the past. We now have some ongoing trials, potentially for some new drugs that could be coming to the market. We're involved with a trial on a drug called ocrelizumab, which is not yet approved by the FDA, but we anticipate that it might be in the next few months. And we're doing a study where if people are suitable candidates, and there are for all trials, there are very strict inclusion and exclusion criteria. The people who can get in and the people who can't get in. To every trial, there are strict criteria. And for people who can get this drug, ocrelizumab, we have it available now before it's released by the FDA. That's called a phase 3B trial. There's a drug similar to that, ofatumumab is the name. I don't expect you to spell that, but ofatumumab is coming in the next, the trial for that is going to be starting soon. Ocrelizumab is the drug we hope will be our first drug approved for treating progressive or primary progressive MS. We have some studies going on now with biotin. Now, biotin is a vitamin. It is a B vitamin, and some studies in Europe show that high doses of vitamin, I'm talking very high doses, were actually beneficial to people with progressive MS. So there are actually now some clinical trials going on with biotin. There is another drug called siponimod, where the results were just published in the last couple of weeks, showing benefit in treating secondary progressive MS. So for the first time, really, we're seeing a light open up for treating patients with progressive forms of MS.
Now, Dr. Steingo, be careful. I am a really good speller. I had a hepatopancreatic biliary surgeon on the program a few weeks ago. I can spell it. No, I'm just kidding. I will not be able to spell fentanyl, Sipamol, or I'm probably butchering those as well.
You didn't even pronounce them rightly. You definitely won't spell them.
So, yeah, I won't be able to spell those. But let me ask you a little bit more about the first clinical trial that I discovered that you were involved in. I know you've done many, but and that's been published as well. I know this trial has ended, but I do have a quick question about it. So it's the PREFREMS. It's the real world study of patients with relapsing, remitting multiple sclerosis. And you mentioned the drug there is fingolimod, and if I butchered it, please fix it. It's a common brand called Gilenya, and that is for the treatment of flare-ups of multiple sclerosis. So what is a flare-up of multiple sclerosis? I mean, what do they mean by that?
So earlier you heard me use the word relapses or attacks or exacerbations. Those are all the words we use for what the best word to really call would be an MS attack. It's also called a relapse or an exacerbation, or you could call it a flare-up. It's when someone has an acute event with their MS. And if you were able to study their brain at that point, you would see that there was an area of inflammation. And so the drugs we have are drugs to prevent people, to reduce people's amount of relapses, to prevent them from having relapses if possible, to shut them down. And so fingolimod is a drug that has been approved to treat people from having relapses. And when they do any clinical trial, there's always side arms of the trial looking at other aspects. And this was a side study looking at a subsequent side study looking at how do people like fingolimod, which is an oral medication, compared to some other medications like injectables. And this little study of which we were part. There were many other investigators involved, but we were one group. And then the companies will allow certain investigators to appear on certain posters like this. And they said that people did prefer, in fact, oral medications to injectables.
Now, fingolimod, is that something that is taken orally?
Yes, that's an oral medication.
Okay, and that was, you were proving the difference between that and IDMTs, which are injectable disease-modifying therapies. So that injectable something that the neurologist would do, or the patient would learn how to do, or a family member or a guardian?
No, these are injectables that the patients themselves administer themselves.
So that was a study. Now, do you also do a placebo in that study as well? Is that like, when I'm thinking of a study, I always think placebo. You know, am I getting is my family member going to get the placebo or not, kind of thing?
I mean, all the early MS clinical trials were studying a new drug against the placebo, because in those days we had no options, and the FDA said you have to compare it to placebo because there are no approved drugs. But nowadays, in 2016, when we have these 15 agents, it's not really ethical. In my mind, it's difficult to compare to a placebo, because if you're telling someone they need a drug, how do you give them the option of a drug versus a placebo? You're basically, they're not treating them. Mm-hmm. And so most trials these days use a drug against what we call an active comparator. So the comparator is not a placebo, it's an active comparator. You're comparing them to an active drug.
Okay.
That's mostly what we're doing these days.
Okay, and I know this study has ended, the one that I just mentioned, but now if someone's listening or they see this on social media, the internet, YouTube, and they think that, you know, this would be good for a family member or friend, how does a clinical trial work? Do they call your office and see if they can get an appointment, see if they can get in, or is there another route that is taken?
They can either call, the best thing is to call the office and probably come for a consultation. We could refer them directly to the research department, but they could call our office and come in for a consultation, and then we would have to review the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Of course, we'd have to tell everybody, we spell out in detail the risks and the benefits, because these are humans that we're dealing with, and so there's very strict regulations for how you put a human subject in a clinical trial, so that the subject is always well protected. It's crucial in a trial, the subject is well protected. Sometimes people feel that they're, quote, guinea pigs. And in some kind of trials, they could be a guinea pig in a way. But all these drugs that we have are because there are people that have said, you know, we're going to contribute and go forward. And we wouldn't have these drugs if there weren't people out there who were prepared to go and say, okay, I'm prepared to accept these particular risks because of these potential benefits.
Now, is it often a good idea also if just to see a neurologist, because maybe you're not perfect for this one trial over here, but you have several trials going on. So down the road, through your detailed notes on each patient, you can call them back and say, hey, I know you wouldn't have been good for this, and these are the reasons why, but I can offer this to you coming up, and then kind of offer that way. That's something that has happened before?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So not only are there trials for the MS drugs that we've spoken about, but there are trials for treating the MS symptoms. For example, a lot of people with MS have what we call spasticity, which is stiffness of muscles. There's a trial for that. There was a trial for people that have trouble walking. We now have a drug that helps people with MS and walking problems to help their walking. So all of these have been through trials. So you might not have a drug for their particular stage of the disease, or they might not be prepared to accept those risks, or they might have exclusions. And so you may have other things that you can offer to help some of their symptoms.
Okay, so if you have a family member, friend, or if you're a patient or a guardian interested in finding out the latest clinical research going on here in Palm Beach and Broward County for multiple sclerosis, you can call Dr. Brian Steingo's office at 954-321-1776. And as I mentioned, his main office is in Sunrise, Florida, 3540 North Pine Island Road in Sunrise. Dr. Steingo, I wanted to ask you this before, and I forgot. How long have you been treating MS?
I mean, I've had a specific interest in MS for 25 years, approximately. And so now my practice is restricted essentially to MS.
Okay.
Except for a couple of stragglers that I've had as patients of mine for 25 years, but it's essentially 99.9% MS.
Okay, and then before that, you were a general neurologist.
Right.
And I just want to touch on a couple of your education and training, because I'm totally going to butcher this one. Your medical school, University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Yeah, it's just I mean, you could say Johannesburg.
Will you say
it's Witwatersrand.
That's awesome.
Witwatersrand. It probably stands for like White Water Mountain or something.
Okay, and you're originally from South Africa?
Yes, I am.
Johannesburg as well?
Right.
Okay, and you were telling me that you actually just had a chance to travel back there in the last...
Well, I like my hobby is photography, and especially nature photography. So Africa, there's no other place where you have nature photography like Africa. And so I travel back when I can. We've been to other locations too, but Africa I like particularly. For big mammals and, the big five, elephants and lions and buffalo, that's the place to go.
And we're going to go more on that because I really wanted the last... minutes talk about that. You did your internship at Johannesburg General Hospital in Johannesburg, South Africa, general medicine and surgery. So you got to see, is that another word for general? And then what kind of surgery did you?
This is a standard internship that you do. The standard internship is to do internal medicine and 6 months of general surgery.
Okay, general surgery. Okay.
General surgery, right.
And then residency, Johannesburg Hospital Complex, Johannesburg, South Africa, pediatric and internal medicine. The Medical University of South Carolina, Department of Neurology, Charleston, South Carolina, and Baylor College of Medicine, Department of Neurology in Houston, Texas, in the neurology department as well. Dr. Steingo, one thing I wanted to ask you as well, and we just barely touched on it briefly, and we'll just go one more question before the break we have here. How important is the education of MS, not only for the patient, but a family member, friend, or guardian?
I mean, it's very important. So as I said to you before, treatment of MS is a team. I should not be the only member of the team. The patient themselves, and I like to say their families could be involved equally too, but the patient themselves need to be part of the team. And so the families and the patients and everybody around should be educated. And there are many sources that they could get education from. People with MS in general actually are very well-educated patients. They read a lot, and there are sites on the internet. There is the National Multiple Sclerosis Society has great information that people can get. I encourage everybody to join the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. That was actually first formed by a person called Sylvia Lowry in 1946, and has been hugely important both in supporting people with MS and in research, in raising money for research, and also in supporting people with personal needs. So the MS Society has been huge in the field of MS for 70 years. And then there are other organizations such as the MS Association of America. There is a younger organization called MS Views and News, which promotes educational information to patients, and also educational programs, which can all be looked at on YouTube. So the programs that are presented by MS Views and News are available on the internet on YouTube, archived programs where MS specialists talk about different aspects of MS. So there's a lot of information that people can get from the internet.
I think you said it perfect before. You're the quarterback on this team, but you have obviously team members, neuro-ophthalmologists, but then it's important to also have kind of like the wide receivers spread out on the team is the family, friends, and the patient being educated. So this is a total team effort.
Should be.
That's great. Dr. Brian Steingo here on Doctors Are People Too. We're going to take a quick break, and on the other side, talk a little bit about photography and the places Dr. Steingo has been able to do photos around the world.
My name is Dr. Rahul Agarwal. I'm an interventional cardiologist in Jupiter, Florida. I did my medical school at the University of Florida and my internship and residency at the same program. I did my chief residency also at Chance, and then did my cardiology and interventional cardiology at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I specialize in general cardiology, interventional cardiology, and nuclear cardiology. Even though I'm an interventional cardiologist, the majority of my practice involves general cardiology. General cardiology is a pretty broad spectrum in that it involves rhythm problems such as atrial fibrillation, heart disease such as coronary artery disease, congenital heart disease, high blood pressure, and cholesterol problems. I do procedures such as cardioversions, which involve trying to convert the patient back to a normal rhythm if they have an arrhythmia. I also deal with plumbing problems such as the coronary arteries, which if they're blocked, I can do angioplasty and stents, which involves balloons that open up the arteries. And these stents act as scaffolds that keep these arteries open. I really do believe in preventive medicine, and one of the areas that I really focus on is diet. One can really get caught up on the pills aspect and the exercise. And diet we talk about a lot, but unless one really has some guidance as to where to go with diet, it can be quite difficult. So I do give my patients homework in terms of books or movies that they can rent or obtain so that they can get educated. Our cardiology office is located in the Abacoa area of Jupiter, Florida, conveniently located between two of the local hospitals. We provide echocardiography, stress testing, ultra monitoring, and general cardiology office visits. We really pride our practice in its staff, who are very courteous and professional. We believe that under our care, you'll feel the same way too.
You are listening to Doctors Are People Too with David DaPino, who shows us the human side of medical doctors in the community. If you have a question for our guest, call into the show at 888-565-1470. Now, let's get back to the fun side of doctors and show that they are people too.
And we're back. We're here with Dr. Brian Steingo. He's a neurologist at Sunrise Medical Group, director of the Multiple Sclerosis Center at Sunrise Medical Group. Dr. Steingo's phone number is 954-321-1776. He told us before, if you have a friend or a family member or a patient suffering from MS, that you can always call and see if you'd be someone.
Can I just give you a better number?
Yes.
954-738-1700.
954-738-1700.
1700.
1770.
1700.
1700. 954-738-1700.
Right. The other number goes to the general office. 1700 goes directly to our MS practice.
Perfect. So if it's a research question you have or any questions about getting to see Dr. Brian Steingo, the number is 954-738-1700. Or you can go online at sunrisepractices.com, and you can find Dr. Steingo there. He's been practicing medicine since 1973, and for the last 25 years, the expert in multiple sclerosis diagnosis, treatment, and care. In South Florida area, his office is in Broward, but like we said before, he does have patients from Palm Beach and Miami-Dade. We talk so much about multiple sclerosis, and you've been a great guest explaining a disease that isn't always at the forefront, but, you're not just a dude in a white coat and you have a life. So we talked a lot about the dolphins, but I want to get more into the photography that you've done. So when I first met you, I was at your office night. The first thing I noticed in your office is a very warm, inviting office, but all the pictures of the animals, mammals, large mammals on the walls of your actual office. Now, where have you shot photography in the past, and what's next?
I like nature photography, so that's predominantly animals. Because of the number of species, there are 10,000 species of birds or more. So there's a huge amount of birds. So I like bird photography because they're a huge variety and the huge variety. But there, of course, mammals are spectacular. So that's mostly going to Africa, is where you see all the big mammals. And so I love that. So I can never get enough of that, actually. And so we've traveled to Africa, back to Africa many times. We've traveled other places to do bird photography. South America, the tropics is a good spot. We've been to Brazil, Peru, Costa Rica, all those places. We've traveled to some Asian countries.
So a lot of rainforest, it sounds like, for the birds, Costa Rica, Brazil.
You're right, exactly.
Now, what about, I want to hear about the big mammals. Have you photoed a rhino, lions, tigers, a pride?
For example, we went on a trip recently of great interest. We went to Namibia. So Namibia is northwest of South Africa. And so Namibia has elephants and lions, those part of the Big Five, what they call the Big Five. But there's a lot of desert territory, there's a huge amount of desert territory in the northern part, and they have elephants and lions that are desert adapted. So these are elephants that live in the desert, and they have certain features that are a little different from regular elephants, like their feet are bigger because they walk in the desert sand, and then there's desert lions who've adapted to live in the desert. And one of the biggest problems facing them now with the desert elephants and the lions is they're merging between human settlements and these animals. You know, if you have a settlement of people, a lot of the people, we came across a nomadic Namibian tribe called the Hamip tribe. And these people are actually nomadic. They put up tents and then they move from place to place. And they have cattle. And the lions will come and eat their cattle, and they'll shoot the lion or poison it. So the government hopefully is working with ways to prevent this from happening, so that if people do lose the cattle, you reimburse them for it, so they leave the lions in the nature, because these are spectacular creatures. So there's a lot of that work going on. And then, of course, the biggest disaster in Africa right now is the poaching of rhinos. And just poaching and killing them because people have primitive beliefs, and they're already, there's no other way to say it other than that they're primitive and backward, that if you take the rhino's horn and grind it down, it's got some aphrodisiac properties or some other properties, and they kill these magnificent animals, which if you see them in nature look like a dinosaur. They're just beautiful. And they kill them. And so people poach them. So there was a project in Namibia called the Desert Rhino Project where they're trying to preserve them. And part of it actually is that almost to preserve them, you almost have to maim them. So what they'll do sometimes is capture them, anesthetize them, and then cut off their horn in a humane way. And then the animal will survive because nobody's going to hunt them if they've got no horn. So hopefully that's a way for right now until people are educated. But where there's a few bucks to be made, there's always some nasty, greedy people out there and misdirected, unintelligent people that are going to go and kill these rhinos. So that's a very sad thing that's happening. So hopefully with projects like the Desert Rhino Project in Namibia, and I'm sure there are other African projects like that to try and protect the rhinos from these poachers. So that's some of the things we've seen more recently.
And thank you for bringing that up on Doctors Are People too. I mean, that's an awareness that I would have never known about, and we're going to get it out there. And also, I've never met anyone in my life who has been to Namibia. I probably butchered that, but that is really neat. Now, so you've obviously, these are kind of, you followed nomadic tribes, but these are safaris, but then they're kind of more in depth a little bit than when you go. You seem to be off the beaten path a little bit.
Well, we like
You've done a few times.
We like to see the nature and to bring in a little bit of culture if we can. My wife likes to go to places where there's some culture offered as well. And so in Namibia, we did have the opportunity to go and see these nomadic tribes and spend a few hours there with them. And these people live in very primitive conditions that a regular American person would never understand. And we complain and compare to what they have, where even the poorest people here live better than they do. I mean, they live literally in the desert. They've got a little hut that's smaller than your office, and 6 of them live in that hut. They prepare their own food. They milk their cows. They milk their goats. They sit and they shake the food and drink the food and live off the land largely. So it's a hard existence, but they seem to be quite happy with their lives. They just have adapted to it, and they don't know what TV is. They don't know what an election debate is. It doesn't cross their mind. There's some peace to it. But you see modern Western stuff infiltrating. For example, at the end of our tour, they sold us some stuff, some of the beads and things they've done, which were beautiful. And you pay them money, and then they can use the money, and somebody will go into the market and buy some stuff for them. So there's a little bit of infiltration. It's not totally, primitive anymore. It's not, and this was a different tribe. Of course, the Bushmen are probably the best known tribe in that part of the world, but these are a different tribe that we saw how they lived. It was very interesting.
That's fascinating, Dr. Stenger. I'm glad I asked you that. Now, what about elephants? Have you ever done photography of elephants in Africa?
I love elephants. I mean, just to see them in nature. They're such majestic creatures, and to think people used to hunt them too, that's improved it a little bit. People used to hunt them too for their ivory. And so you've got this magnificent creature, and they're a matriarchal society, that you'll have a bunch of mothers and daughters and babies living together, and they take care of each other very well. And people were hunting them for their ivory, but that's apparently lessened a little bit because ivory, I think, is banned in some parts of the world, many parts of the world now.
Because of awareness?
Because of awareness.
Wow.
But just to see them in nature, it's just spectacular.
That's kind of like what you hear with the sharks, how people cut off the fin of the shark. And, a tribe or, you know, Bushmen would use the whole animal. If they were going to kill the animal, they would use the ivory, they'd eat the meat for their village, they'd use everything.
Right.
But now people are just cutting off pieces of animals, and the animal will die because of that, because they'll bleed to death. We're seeing it with sharks right off our coast and other parts of the world, finning or whatever they do. So, yeah, that's a shame. What about locally? Do you ever go do any bird watching photography at Waxahachie or maybe closer to where you're from in Broward County?
So, I mean, South Florida is good. There's especially in certain times of the year when birds are migrating, in April, October-ish time, there's good sites. But Waxahachie and Delray and Green Cay wetlands and Delray are very good places locally. And then you can go to the coast, especially the west coast, actually St. Pete. That area has got beautiful shorebirds. But yes, there are definitely places in Florida where there's good birding.
That's good to hear. That's right in my backyard, Waxahachie, so I've been there in Green Cay as well. And I'm from Jupiter, originally, so I know that. Dr. Steingo, I can't thank you enough for explaining multiple sclerosis, spending a whole hour with us. I've wanted to have you on forever, and I don't think I've had a better interview. You put it all out there, and I just want to say thank you. And then the photography stories as well. Please come back to Doctors Are People, too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening and watching Doctors Are People Too with David DaPino. Join us next week for more in-depth views on what doctors are all about and how they spend their free time. All shows can be seen on amp2.tv. And if you have questions you want answered on the air, call 866-224-5422 and leave a message that can be read on the air. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of the station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
Talk 1470 WWNN Pompano Beach, Boca Raton, Miami, Fort Lauderdale.